Welcome to my tutorial about no line coloring. The stamp set that we're using today is the Sprigs and Sentiments. You can see the beautiful leaf images that it's got. Very easy to use the no line coloring technique with this. The Sentiment and Sprigs set, currently the dies are not available, but I will keep you posted if you're interested in this set when the dies are available, and you can get it that way, or you can purchase it now without the dies. So let's get started. This is our first example of no line coloring. No line simply means that when you finish with the project, it is not going to look like you have these dark black lines of the image stamped, but rather it will look more like you drew the image with one solid color, like you used a pencil to outline it and then filled it in. That is why on the sample sheets that I have prepared, there's the black, which is done in intense black, so any kind of coloring medium that you use with it will work fine. I've also stamped it in sage green. Since these are leaves, we're going to be using green color, and there will be even less of a line showing when we use that green. The other color is our mink, which is a medium tone gray. We have a little bit lighter one called linen that is still current. There's an older one called pebble. Those work as long as you have really good vision and can see the extremely light lines that are being used. If you don't, then the mink has come out very nicely for me. That is what I've used on the samples. What I'm going to start with is using a watercolor technique, but rather than getting out all my watercolors and all the water and stuff with that, I'm just going to use my ink pad and use my stamp block here as my palette to put the color on. This is a sample of what I did with that sage green using a water brush and the ink as my watercolor. So you can see the difference between having the stark black lines versus the green used to stamp the image, where you don't see those lines. It's a softer feel. You will not get the detail of the inside here like you've got with the black, but that's okay. That's not what I'm looking for in this project. I'm looking for a soft feel. I can always come back in with another layer of the ink and add some details to it afterwards, but I don't have that stark, harsh line that's there with the dark black outline. That's why you have the options, so that you can save this as a sample and see afterwards how you like it best. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. I am going to take and pounce my ink directly onto my pad, and that is going to provide me with, if you can see here, you see that there's ink on there. I'll put a little bit more and get as much on there, but it's not going to take a whole lot. Then I have water, and I have a regular watercolor brush, which is the smallest one that I have, and this is one of the water brushes. The water brush typically has water in the barrel, and you push on it and let the water come out to work with in a project. I don't trust that. I'm afraid that I'm going to get too much water coming out, or it's just going to start to drip as I'm working. So I am working with an empty barrel, but I like the tip of this one. It's very, very fine. So I'm going to use it as my watercolor paintbrush instead of this one, just because it is so fine at the end. I then have a covered jar with my paint, with my water in it, and of course a piece of paper towel underneath it to kind of wipe off my brush. Now I'm going to zoom in as much as I can because I want you to see the details as best as possible. And I think I can have this, if I move this over here for right now, I'm going to put it on top of the other one. But you'll see what I'm doing. I'm going to come in and I'm going to add water to this. I'm going to have another piece of scrap cardstock right here so I get an idea about how dark this color is. Now, I don't want it really dark. The piece of cardstock I've got here is plain cardstock. What I stamped your images on is watercolor cardstock. That was a special flat, no texture watercolor cardstock that Close to My Heart sold a number of years ago. I'm going to say at least 5 years, 5-6 years ago is when it was first introduced. We now sell the distressed watercolor cardstock, which has texture on one side and it's flat on the other side, which makes it good for stamping, because if you want to stamp an image on textured cardstock, textured watercolor paper, unless you're using a stamp platform, it's hard to do. So this is nice that the distress watercolor cardstock is flat on one side and textured on the other. The thing about watercolor cardstock is that it will accept the water. It won't soak into the paper as much. It'll more stay on the surface. Before I start with any of this, and I've already got some of my water here and I'm just going to add a little bit more to it, I am going to add, for each leaf that I do, I am going to go over it with a damp, not wet, damp paintbrush first. And I'm going to start with this one and just put some water down so that my ink has some place to go into. So now I'm going to come back here and just start putting that color down on there. Whoops, wrong one. I put the water on the other one there first. Okay, and I can come back in with the area that I haven't added any water to, and that's going to be a stronger color. And I can come in and give it a little bit more depth along the edges. Now I'm going to do the same thing on this second one here, even though I started it a little bit. And I'm going to add the lightest of my color and then pick up a little bit more and then go over here where there is no water and pick up more color from that section. And it will allow it to just get whatever color gradient you want. Because the image is stamped in the sage ink, it is not a water, it is going to react with the water is what I want to say. The black will not, that's the intense black. So it may bleed a little bit, and that's okay for what I'm doing on the inside colors. That's fine with me that bleeds and gives a little bit more softness to this. So I'm hoping you can see where I'm at right here. I'm getting that color going down based on where the lines are with what I've stamped. I'm just speeding up the video here so that you can continue to see the same process that I'm going to repeat over and over, but you won't take so long. Again, a little bit of water on each of the leaves before I put my ink that's got water added to it down for my watercolor. Now this leaf that I'm coming to right now is going to end up a little bit darker, but that's okay because it ends up that I go back and put another layer of color over the ones that I've already finished. And that way I can add dimension. In this case, it's just depth of color, but you could start adding in lines or anything else that you want to add to those sections. It works great. And using your inks as watercolor is something that I've done since I first started stamping. I didn't have a lot of colors. I didn't have a lot of coloring mediums, and it was a quick, easy way to do it. And I just did it right off of my stamp pad. I could push down, and sometimes if you've got that ink here in the top, you could just use that as your palette. Just add water directly to that. So now all of them have a little bit more depth except this top one. So I'm going to see if I can come back in and get a little bit more going with that one. And there, I've deepened the color of all of them. At the present time, they all still have just the sage green stem. Just so that it all kind of fits together, I'm going to come pick up some just ink. There's been no water added to it. And see how it goes if I just go with the very fine tip of my water brush and paint those stems so that they have that same watercolor feel to them as the rest of the project does. And you can see that it gave a little bit more depth to the stems there. So that's working with the ink on the block and a water brush directly to the paper with green ink as the stamped base. I did not even record my coloring of the black image. It's the same as I did with the other two, but now you can see the difference in what happens when you have that stark outline around your images versus either the gray or a green stamped image that you are then coloring. I think it's an amazing difference. This is one quick, easy way to do it without much supplies, and I think it's great. The other thing that I'm going to show you is using your watercolor pencils to do the same thing. I've also seen a number of videos where they used true watercolors. I'm not trying to become an absolute artist and do that, but it is absolutely beautiful if you have a good command with watercolors. And it's also possible to do it with your alcohol markers. I think I have a sample here that I did. This is done with alcohol markers, the tri-blend markers that Close to My Heart sells. So again, you can see that there is no definition in the center here. And the only definition that I gave on this one was from the lines from the stamped image. I did use two different, the mid and the light of this green. I believe it's dull green, but I'm not positive at the moment. But it's just a quick, easy way to do that as well. So you can do that with the alcohol markers. Just know that your ink from either the gray or the green may bleed a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be much of a problem. I just stayed right at the edge of all the lines and it turned out just fine. Let me get set up now for the watercolor pencils. Working with watercolor pencils, I am going to do two different coloring options on this one, not the same as I did before. I did them both with the sage ink. On this one, I'm going to do one of the leaf stems with two colors. This is a clover meadow and a citrus leaf green. On the other one, I'm just going to use the single olive, and I'll just use darker on one side and pull that color over. The technique that I'm using with these, you really could do even if you use, say, Prismacolor pencils and you blend with Gamsol. The same concept would be there, so you could do it that way. You could also, if you just like to color with colored pencils, just color as you normally would. It's just that you're not going to have the black outline. Now, to blend the watercolor pencils, and that's the thing that's nice, you can use watercolor pencils as a regular color pencil, or you can blend them and the colors will blend together more smoothly. I'm going to start with my single color of the olive, okay? And when I color, I'm going to color in a circular motion right at the line that we've got our outline going. And I just take small circular motions right at the line, and along this edge it's darker, okay? And then I'm going to do lighter color off to the side. Now, the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm going to pull the color, the dark color from here, into the rest of it. And I'm going to come in and just start pulling that color over and making it all blend together. And you can see that I'm eliminating a lot of that darkness over there, but I still have a line that shows it's a bit darker on that side. One thing that's really nice about using the watercolor pencils or just regular colored pencils is that I can go through and I can color all of my leaves at once, which I am going to do, and I'll speed it up once I finish chatting with you about this. But I can go through and color them all. I can also come back in afterwards and add some color to another spot where I think I didn't get it quite as dark as it should have been. So again, I'm using my circular motion. I am not pushing hard. I do not want stark lines. I just want light lines there. And I'm going around and just getting that colored in as best I can. Once again, I'm continuing the same process, just at a faster speed so we can get through this. I will come back after I do the two-toned leaves and do the watercoloring on all of them at that time. And I'm adding the stems as well. Okay, it's all colored. You can see that I've got darker on the left side, and that's where my shading is going to come in. On the other one that I'm going to use over here, I said I was going to use two different colors. I am going to use the clover meadow and the citrus leaf, okay? These are old colors from close to my heart, an old set of watercolor pencils, but they gave me the colors that I wanted. I'm going to use this darker one on the edge, and they're not the exact same tone at all, but they work well together. So once again, I am going to do this first one as I chat with you, and then I'm going to speed it up as I color the rest of them. But it turns out that the colors blend together quite nicely. You'll notice that I lay that clover piece down first and get that darker edge on all of the leaves, and then I'm going to come back with the lighter citrus color and fill those in. Again, the stems can be done the same way I did before, just using your colored pencil to go over the stems to give them some color. Okay, that's all colored in. I'm actually going to demonstrate the painting on this other strip that's colored the same way as you just saw. The olive is on top, and I'm going to use that same fine-tipped watercolor brush, and I just want it damp. I don't want too much water so that I would have a tendency to go outside of the lines if there's too much water on it. And I'm starting at the dark side, bringing that color in so that it blends it out. It's a smoother color. If you leave that edge on there with the darker part, you will have that show up, and that's fine. It's kind of a shadow technique. So it's however you want to smooth out these colors. Make them as light or leave them as dark as you want. So you'll notice each time I get water on my brush, I go back and I wipe it off so that my brush is just damp. Now with the two-toned, I am starting again with the dark section and pulling that color in. Here I am doing a little bit more blending because I want the two colors to mesh together, and it happens very quickly. It's nice because you really can create your own unique colors this way. Watercolor pencils are relatively inexpensive compared to alcohol markers, let's say. And so you can really mix and match and come up with the colors that you want with this. So again, I'm just going over this with a damp brush, and you see I don't have to get more water each time. If I need more, I can go grab it, but otherwise I'm just working with that brush and smoothing those colors out. Now here I'm going to come down, and I actually get too much water on the leaf. So I dried off my brush and tried to pull some of the water off that way and took it directly over to some of the other leaves to kind of balance that out. But I'm getting them all worked in there together and end up with, I think, a very nice, workable solution. Here you can see the contrast comparison with all three methods that I've shown you. We actually worked with the ink with watercoloring, and we worked with the watercolor pencils. I simply showed you the example of the tri-blend markers. But I hope that you have enjoyed this process and that you'll give it a try with some of the artwork that you've got that you want to put on your projects.